To start off, when we examine British colonization before the French and Indian War, one of the most important concepts to understand is salutary neglect, sometimes called benign neglect. This term refers to Britain's long-standing policy of loosely enforcing laws and regulations in its American colonies. While England technically regulated colonial trade and governance, it interfered in colonial affairs as little as possible. This was not because Britain believed in colonial independence, but because the system was profitable and relatively stable. Under salutary neglect, Britain stationed absentee customs officials in the colonies, meaning many officials lived in England and left colonial governments largely to govern themselves. Even when trade laws were violated, British authorities frequently turned a blind eye, allowing smuggling and illegal trade to flourish. Over time, this lack of oversight allowed colonists to develop a strong sense of autonomy and self-government. Importantly, when Britain later attempted to assert tighter control after 1763, colonists viewed these efforts as violations of long-standing rights, helping to fuel revolutionary sentiment. Throughout the colonial period, British economic policy was guided by mercantilism, a theory which held that national power was based on wealth, specifically a favorable balance of trade and the accumulation of specie, or gold and silver. Under mercantilism, colonies existed primarily to benefit the mother country economically. As a result, Britain viewed its colonies not as equal partners, but as economic tools. Interestingly, Britain considered its West Indian colonies far more valuable than its North American colonies because sugar plantations produced enormous profits. The North American colonies, by contrast, were seen mainly as markets for British goods and as sources of raw materials such as timber, tobacco, and furs. To enforce mercantilist principles, Parliament passed a series of laws designed to regulate colonial trade. Britain encouraged manufacturing at home, while placing protective tariffs on foreign goods that might compete with English products. The most significant of these laws were the Navigation Acts, passed between 1651 and 1673. The Navigation Acts required colonists to trade exclusively with England, sell certain enumerated goods, such as tobacco, only to England, and import foreign goods through English ports, where duties would be paid. These acts also restricted colonial manufacturing, preventing the colonies from producing goods that England already made. Additional laws, such as the Wool Act of 1699, prohibited the export of wool from the colonies and barred the importation of wool from other British colonies. In response, some colonists turned to flax and hemp production as acts of quiet resistance. The Molasses Act of 1733 further illustrates colonial resistance. This law placed an extremely high tax on sugar and molasses imported from the French West Indies. New England merchants frequently ignored the tax, smuggling molasses instead. This widespread defiance represents one of the earliest patterns of colonial resistance to British authority and foreshadows later rebellion. Despite economic regulation, colonial governments retained substantial independence. Each colony had a governor, usually appointed by the king, or a proprietor, who theoretically wielded powers similar to those of the monarch. However, governors depended on colonial legislatures for salaries and funding, meaning their authority relied heavily on cooperation with local leaders. Most colonies had bicameral legislatures modeled after Parliament. The lower house, elected by white male property owners, controlled taxation and spending and thus wielded significant power. The upper house, composed of appointed elites, advised the governor and exercised limited legislative and judicial authority. Because these upper house members were often colonists themselves, they tended to protect local landowning interests rather than imperial goals. Notably, Britain never established a strong central government in the colonies. This lack of centralized authority allowed colonial political institutions to develop independently, easing the colonies' eventual transition toward independence. Although Britain imposed no centralized authority, colonists occasionally attempted cooperation. The New England Confederation was the most significant early effort at regional unity. While it lacked enforcement power, it provided a forum for colonies to discuss mutual concerns, laying early groundwork for intercolonial cooperation. As the colonies matured, They developed distinct regional identities, economies, and cultures. Over time, an American culture emerged, increasingly separate from European traditions. Immigration patterns shaped these differences. Puritan immigration slowed during Oliver Cromwell's interregnum, when Puritans felt secure in England. However, with the restoration of the monarchy, Puritans once again migrated, bringing with them Republican and anti-monarchical ideas. New England and the Chesapeake region differed dramatically. In New England, entire families immigrated, creating stable communities with longer life expectancy and larger families. Towns developed around meeting houses, reinforcing strong religious and communal bonds. The absence of a dominant cash crop meant farms remained small, and slavery was rare. In contrast, the Chesapeake attracted mostly single male immigrants seeking economic opportunity. Tobacco dominated the economy, leading to dispersed settlements and weaker community ties. Large plantations required extensive labor, increasing reliance on enslaved Africans. Several colonies were established as proprietorships, granted by the king to individuals. Connecticut adopted the Fundamental Orders, often considered the first written constitution in British North America. Maryland, granted to Lord Baltimore, was intended as a Catholic refuge, but quickly experienced religious conflict, leading to the Act of Tolerance in 1649. New York, originally Dutch, was seized by England in 1664. Despite English rule, Dutch settlers remained influential. Pennsylvania, founded by William Penn, became known for religious tolerance and rapid population growth. Penn's idealism toward Native Americans contrasted with his son's later exploitation of treaty agreements. The Carolinas developed plantation economies heavily dependent on slavery, particularly in South Carolina, which was influenced by the slave-based sugar economy of Barbados. Georgia, founded as a buffer against Spanish Florida, initially banned slavery, though the ban was later overturned for economic reasons. By the eve of the Revolution, most colonies had become royal colonies, increasing Britain's formal control. Colonial population growth was dramatic. Between 1700 and 1750, the population increased fivefold. Immigration from Scotland, Ireland, and Germany diversified colonial society, while the enslaved black population grew rapidly, particularly in the South. By 1750, over 200,000 black people lived in the colonies. Colonial society was overwhelmingly rural, patriarchal, and hierarchical. Gender roles were rigid, education was limited, and women had few legal rights. Enslaved people faced harsh conditions, but formed extended kinship networks and preserved cultural traditions as acts of resistance. Cities, though small, were centers of trade and ideas. Poor sanitation and disease were common, but cities facilitated education, communication, and social mobility. Bacon's rebellion in 1676 revealed class tensions between frontier farmers and coastal elites. Nathaniel Bacon mobilized discontented settlers against Native Americans and colonial leadership, exposing deep economic and political divisions. The Stono Uprising of 1739 was one of the largest slave rebellions in colonial America. Its suppression led to stricter slave codes and heightened racial control. The Salem Witch Trials of 1692 reflected religious anxiety, gender tensions, and political instability. Combined pressures including war, religious decline, and social change triggered mass hysteria. Puritanism weakened over generations, leading to reforms like the Halfway Covenant. Religious decline and Enlightenment rationalism sparked the First Great Awakening, which emphasized emotional faith and challenged traditional authority. Figures like Jonathan Edwards and George Whitefield reshaped colonial religion, while Benjamin Franklin embodied Enlightenment ideals, promoting science, self-improvement, and civic responsibility.